that you can do. So may be a blessing and success for everyone. We're going to learn. We're going to record today's Chumash class. Today's Chumash class in the last portion of Parsha Shoftim, right? So I'm going to do Shabbos' portion. We have recorded, Baruch Hashem, the first 6 days, but I'm going to record the 7th section. This is an area which I would say people have the biggest question could have on Judaism. It bothers people sometimes about it. I'm very happy on the plane on the way back from Chicago. I learned some of the commentaries on it to explain it. And I'll share with you, I'll be open about it, what it seems to say, and then the commentaries will explain the sum of, at least it doesn't seem what it is. On the one hand, and I'll share with you the conflict even, perhaps, that might be hard to stomach, but the way the commentaries explain it, it's not really so as difficult. So we know, we always talk in our Tanya class all over that God's compassionate. In our Chumash class, we should be like God. God is kind, God is just giving and compassionate and so on. And today's Chumash, the way it describes the war of the Jewish people against the nations that they're supposed to attack, one might say that it seems a little bit much. And it almost could seem, perhaps, if you just read the Rashi on today's Chumash, and you wouldn't know the commentaries, and you wouldn't have been in some other classes we've given on this similar topic, you might not get the full scope. So good, let's do it together, and we'll see inside what we're talking about. Yisikrav el ir, when you come close to a city, lihilachem aleha, to fight a war against it. So you're coming to wage a war against the city, and you're going to fight a war against it. The karasa aleha l'shali. You should first propose peace to it. You should offer a peace treaty. You should offer peace to the people among it, and try not to. In other words, let's make a deal. Maybe even offer them to leave. Maybe offer them to accept Judaism, or maybe accept some of the rules of Judaism. So he's telling you, yes, you should first try and make peace with the city that you're coming to capture. So Rashi says, and here's where the challenge might have come up. Rashi says that when should you make peace with the city? With a war that is called Rishus. It's talking about an optional war, which means an optional war that, let's say you want to expand the country, you want Israel to grow, you want to conquer more land that's not told by God that you must capture it, not that you must attack those nations. You should first offer peace before waging a war and destroying the inhabitants of the town. Now, which might imply, and that's the way I've always thought about it, is it implies that if it's a war that Hashem told you to fight against, that you should fight against that nation, it's not an optional war, but required by God. For example, the tribe Amalek, the group of Amaleks who attacked the Jewish people, or the 7 nations who live in Israel that they were coming to attack. Should a peace offer be given? Or maybe the Midianites who seduced the Jews. Should you kind of make peace with them? Or King Sichon from the city of Heshbon. Should a peace treaty be offered? Or right away just go in and wipe everybody out that's inside the city? Now, as I always thought when I read the Rashi, that it's clear Rashi saying that you should make peace only when it's an optional war. But if it's not an optional war, for example, you must conquer the country of Israel from the Canaanites and the 7 nations that were there at the time, everybody needs to be wiped out. You could have implied that from Rashi. But based on the commentaries, the Mizrahi is one of them, and the Gur Aryeh, who's another famous commentary who explains Rashi. Among other sources we alone have had in our class, we've learned that Moshe Rabbeinu, even though God didn't tell him to offer peace before he attacked, I believe it was Sichon, the king of the Amorites, Moses offered peace because he learned from God, as God, I forget what was the pretext earlier, that Moses learned from God that you always offer peace first before you attack. And over here, Rashi seems, if you read it simply, seems to imply that if only in an optional war do we offer peace, not in a required war, we have to just wipe everybody out. And I remember when you go to the even the rabbinic classes and you say, what are some of the hardest questions to address? And they share this question. But my friends, I'm going to tell you the truth now based on these commentaries and other sources from also what we looked in the Navi of Yeshua. The commentaries, at least these two, want to say everybody's offered peace. You do not take away peace. If anyone, as we're going to see, even in a few verses from now, Rashi explains, if they are ready to accept, to convert, not a Jewish conversion, they're accepting the 7 Noahide laws not to kill, basic for humanity civilization. They're ready to accept those laws. You're allowed to let them live in your midst. You don't wipe them out, actually. You allow them, let them to live. And even if they don't accept, you allow them time to leave. You go into the city and you say, listen, God commanded us that we're supposed to live here. You're a corrupt and terrible nation. You need to be out. We're offering you to leave. Or we're offering you to become local residents, pay tax to the country, and accept not to serve idols, not to do your corrupt, terrible ways, to live among our midst. And then we will wage a war. Now, what happens is, once the war has started, this is the way the commentators want to explain what Rashi's saying, then we do not back out at that point in time. Once you've been given a clear choice and you've given an option, at that point, you know what's going to come, and the war has to be completely and fully administered. So there is always an option given for peace. The question is, once the war has started, according to the certain nations that are, in other words, when we say corrupt, we mean like ISIS, like really, really bad people, were these nations that Hashem commanded us to wipe them out. Had they converted, at least not a full conversion, but at least converted to start accepting, behaving like moral people, not to kill and to believe in God, the basics, the 7 Noahide laws, at that point, we will allow them to stay, become part of the community, accept the Jewish sovereignty in that country, and then they will be allowed to stay. So it's not as bad as, it's not as strong as some people might have thought it to be. It's a very important idea, which I did not know. I heard the question, never heard it been answered so clearly, like I've shared with you today. Those are some of the commentaries that I heard. Meanwhile, let's go back to our Chumash, verse 11, and see what happens with a city that there's an optional war that you always extend peace. And by the way, according to the commentaries, Rashi is saying, you, even once the war has started, where it's an optional war, even if they change their mind in the middle of the war and say, we want to make peace, then you make peace at that time and you allow them to accept the basics of the 7 Noahide laws, and they can live amongst humans. Let's see inside. If they respond, yes, we want to live at peace with you, and it wants to be open to you, then all the locals that want to stay where the Jews are conquering the land should pay taxes, and they shall also serve you. Like, for example, where they served in the temple and they helped out, in other words, it's not a free ride. You can't just live here. You have to participate and take part in society and actually do your due shares involved with sustaining the Jewish country that's living there at the time. And Rashi said that clearly here, that even the 7 nations Jews have been commanded to wipe out, you're allowed to let them live as long as they accept on themselves some of the basics of behaving morally, accepting the moral, at least, code of Jewish, where the Torah perceives it, and agree to pay the taxes and serve and do what they're supposed to do in the community, to do their, whatever, I don't know what it means to serve, but I think like in the times of Yeshua, they helped out carry the water, be not just takers, but also important element of givers within the Jewish community that's living there at the time. And what happens if in the optional war, they do not make peace with you? They say, no, we want to fight you and kill you. You should do war with this nation. Remember, this is an optional war we're talking about here. And the way to deal with that country is to create a siege. The verse is describing the way to deal with it. So I think that one of the commentators explained, either you try the first 3 days to take it over. If it doesn't work, you create a siege around the city. And Rashi is telling you something very interesting from the verse. If you follow strictly this order of war in capturing the cities of these nations around you, you'll be successful. If not, you should know, if you don't put this nation living there under control, to behave morally, and to accept Judaism as the local superpower, they will wage war against you. In other words, there's no middle ground. There's no peace treaty, kind of, let's just keep things as is. They have to accept the Jewish sovereignty of the location And the fact Rashi says the verse is telling you that if not, you should know you're just going to have problems and tzaris and going to deal with them creating a war against you. And you should lay a siege. So if they didn't accept your peace, then you make a siege. And Rashi says, starve it out, cause them to die of thirst, or through disease. You should do things to cause with the siege that the nation who's chosen to fight you will be in a siege and therefore wipe them out. If you do everything Hashem says, that God will give them in your hand, you will be successful. The key says, and you don't kill everybody, you only kill the males of fighting age, so which means all the warriors by the sword. You do wage war and you kill them. Verse 14, Rakanashim, all the women, Ataf, and the children, the younger males, and all the animals that they left behind after this war. Anything that was in the city called Shlalam Tavis, you should take the spoils for yourself, love for you. And you should eat, you should enjoy the spoils of your enemy that God has given you. Hashem gave you these spoils of war. You won, you were successful, they're for you. Hashem wants you to have them. So should you do to all the cities which are far away from you, very far, but not of the goyim that live in Israel. These are all the rules and regulations for optional wars for whatever reason. I don't know what an optional war would be, but the prophecy came and said, or the king decided he needed more land. You have to be very careful to follow, try to make peace, and they can live there if they accept the regulations. However, what about the Ma'ari Hamim, the cities of the nations, these where you're going to Israel, Hashem is telling you to go. That God gave to you, these land of Israel belonged only to the Jewish people. This is what God has decided. That's where Israel goes to, Nachla, as their inheritance. You shouldn't let anybody live. Everyone has to be wiped out, men, women, and children. And again, as I explained in the beginning of today's lesson, commentaries explain that's only if they wanted to fight. They didn't want to fight, they wanted to make peace, they accepted the 7 Noahide laws. Either they could leave or they could stay and accept Jewish sovereignty and some basics of morality of Judaism. Because you should utterly destroy them, these 7 nations. Remember, they acted like ISIS. They were terrible people. Achiti, V'Hamori, Haknani, V'Aprizi, V'Achivi, V'Avusi, all the 7 nations that lived there, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, and Rashi says the Girgashites too, which is also referenced in this verse, as God has commanded you to do. The man, in order. Why is this so important? Why must you get rid of everyone if they don't convert? The man, at least a partial conversion, accept God's sovereignty. So you shouldn't learn from them. If you leave them as is, to continue in their adulterous, ISIS, immoral, terrible, destructive ways, the Jewish people will become like them. They'll be immoral, have their, whatever they do, immorality, all kinds of things, killing and ISIS. The Jews themselves will become, God forbid, like ISIS. So they don't teach you, you have to get rid of them if they're not accepting sovereignty and conversion, at least the partial conversion, the 7 Noahide laws. Also, that they're going to act like they do to their gods. Remember, we learned that they would even give their father to their dog as food, to kill him as a sacrifice, crazy stuff. And you will end up sinning very much so to Hashem, to our God Hashem, by copying their ways. Now, he comes up with a very interesting new law. It's fascinating that this is what's chosen to add to the obligation of in war. Another thing, and it's like interesting almost. It's funny. It's not funny, but this is a new rule that you have to be careful. It's a fascinating lesson. What could we learn from this? We can discuss. But he wants to tell you another very last point about war. When you go to lay besiege, right now you're sieging the city. Yamim Rabim, and you're going to do it for many days. Now, just an interesting Rashi here, caveat before we get into the whole verse, about what does it mean? He's telling you that you have to first, for 3 days, you actually, one of the commentaries say you try to attack it, and the first 3 days, you must go at least 3 days before Shabbos. In other words, don't start, I guess, Thursday, Friday, and Shabbos is the third day. You want to start at least on Wednesday, Monday, Tuesday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so that by the time Shabbos comes around, it's not like the war is starting on Shabbos, or maybe people were not be in the right frame of mind because Shabbos, you're supposed to be calm. At least maybe if you're into war already 3 days, they're not freaking out like with the first 3 days of war, so they could somewhat celebrate Shabbos in. So don't start the war right before Shabbos. It almost looks like it's within 3 days of Shabbos, like you're starting the war deliberately on Shabbos. Once Shabbos comes, even if you're months in, a week in, or so on, you obviously, we know, like the IDF, they violate Shabbos in order to protect the Jewish people, but don't start the war within 3 days of Shabbos. Let's get back to our main point. So you go and besiege the city to make a war against it. The Safsa, in order to capture it. Here's the rule. This is what the new rule is. Do not destroy its trees. They need the Doyach Olav Garzin to wield an axe against them. Don't start knocking them and axing them and whacking the trees. Why not? Because you're going to eat from them. Why are you attacking the fruit trees that are on the border near where you are? Do not cut down fruit trees. It's a famous rule. I remember even my Mexican landscaper for my old house. I had a berry tree that we wouldn't eat. The squirrels would all eat it. And he wouldn't cut it down. Good, because you're not allowed to cut down fruit trees. I believe this is the main place where it comes from. So even if you're besieging the city and you're want to destroy everything in the path, you're not prohibiting in Judaism to cut down fruit trees. When you're besieging it, very interesting rule, don't cut it down. What do you want from the fruit tree? If a guy from the city comes out, you can kill him and attack him because you're laying a siege to the enemy. But the fruit tree didn't have an option, as Rashi explains this verse saying, to go into the city to get away. So if a guy comes out, full license to kill the guy, but the fruit tree couldn't go in to the tree, and therefore it's stuck there. Why in the world would you be cutting down fruit trees? Instead, enjoy the fruit from the tree. So it's a very interesting rule that's put in the middle of a war that you're not allowed to cut down fruit trees. Rak, what are you allowed to cut down? If you know it's a tree that's not fruit-bearing tree, you have full license to cut it down. And you could use it, I guess, to build, a wall and help you create that surrounding wall around the city. That it makes you war until it's submission. You have to take the city and get them to submit. And once they're submitted, fine, then everything's good. But you have to siege the city until they submit to some of the rules and regulations. That, my friends, is the end of the first part of today's Chumash. Let us move on, finish the parsha with a second interesting case. What happens, this new case, it's also talking about death. If a dead body is found in middle of, not even in a town, in between towns, like if you go to Israel, there's like cities and then it's desert, city and desert. So they find a dead body. Who's responsible and what should they do? Let's see inside. In today's Chumash, we'll finish with this idea. You find a dead man, a slain person on the ground. Someone's laying there, just a dead person. He's slain. I guess he was killed. Somebody killed him. And this is in the land that God's given you. Find not out of Israel, within Israel. The Rishta is your inheritance. This guy's just laying in the field and nobody knows. There's nobody to see who killed him. So we're going to see at the end of today's Chumash, if you catch the guy, you kill the guy, and it's clear. But the problem here is, I guess, that there's no murderer. It's just a dead body that somebody's responsible for. So what do? Verse 2, the elders, the most prestigious, the Sanhedrin, the head Sanhedrin of all the Jewish people come out to take a travel to this city. The Shoiftecha and the judges, they pull out their rulers are measuring tapes, and they measure who is the closest city to the body. Another city to the east, city to the north. They pull out their, I guess, I don't know what they have those roller things, I think, that measure. When they want to measure something, they have like these, however they measure. Maybe today you could use a laser to measure the distance. And they measure which city is the closest city to this body. And from that city, of the closest city, the elders of that city go and they take a eglas bakar, a calf, a young calf, that has not yet been used for work. We'll see why in a minute. Rashi will tell us. That you never put a yoke on this calf, right? When they get older, you put a yoke on and they help you plow. This is a calf that has never done any work for you. Never put the yoke on. It's a young calf. The elders of that city take the young calf to a local, a valley that was not planted. It's full of rocks, like not used. And Rashi will explain it, talking about never used. Like this is not farmland. This is a rocky terrain valley somewhere near the city. and it should never been used and will not be used, will not be tilled. And they decapitate the calf in that valley. Now, why are you doing all this stuff? So Rashi explains, Hashem says, let this young calf within its first year that has not had any children, its head be chopped off in a place that has not have any fruit, to forgive for a person that did not have any children. So in other words, it was a young, one of the commentaries say, it was an elder person that already had children, you might not do this procedure, but for sure a younger person that has not had kids, you do this whole procedure, and to imply that a terrible calamity has happened, that a murder has taken place and someone has been killed that never even had children yet. The Kohanim from the tribe of Levi come, because God appointed the Kohanim to serve, to be in the service, and to bless the Jewish people. And based on the Kohanim, they should be the ones to decide all fights and all arguments and so on, the legion, people have leprosy and so on. So they come, and all the elders from that local city, that were close to the dead body, they shall wash their hands over the calf that was decapitated in the valley. And this is what they should say: we did not kill this guy, and we did not see. We have no clue. We don't know how this guy got killed. Now Rashi says, what do you mean? Of course, talking about the Kohanim or the elders of the city, that of course they didn't kill. Why do they have to start making disclaimers that it wasn't us who killed him? Do you think that the elders of that city were the ones who killed him? But it means to say that we it's not our fault that he died because we took care of him. We didn't not provide nourishment. We didn't see a guy who was like a homeless guy and just left him up to the whims of anybody to do whatever they want with him. He's another yid you're responsible from the locals, I guess, of your community you're responsible for. And the Kohanim say, Hashem, forgive your nation. It's not our fault that we could have taken better care of him. We did not know. We weren't involved. We took care of him as we should. Hashem, please forgive us. The Kohanim say, verse 8, Hashem, forgive your nation Israel that you have redeemed. And let not there be spilled blood, with innocent blood spilled among the Jewish people, and the blood will bring forgiveness to them. So Hashem will forgive you, but you have to do something about it, and this is what you have to do. And you should abolish the shedding of innocent blood, meaning Rashi explains that if you do after this whole period catch, the FBI gets involved, the Shabbat gets involved, and they find the perpetrator, you still have to do with him justice and kill and make him pay, which we know murder is punishable by death. Because you have to do what's proper in the eyes of Hashem, and even after going through this whole big procedure of decapitating the calf, you must still do what's correct and honorable in Hashem's eyes and punish the perpetrator to this act. And that, my friends, is the end of